All right, guys, it is the Tuesday edition of the I Love Seaville show. Our fabulous director, Judah Wickhauer, is on vacation for some well-deserved R&R. And today, my good buddy Alex Erpy is joining us on the program. So we're live in Charlottesville, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world on the I Love Seaville network. Of course, we're presented by Skooma Boutique Dispensary. We're powered by Ting Fiber Internet, which is crazy fast internet. And folks, I'm going to spend about a half an hour to 45 minutes with Alex Erpy, one of the smartest guys I know. And Alex, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. We're managing and juggling a lot of balls today, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have it any other way. A lot I want to cover with you on the Tuesday edition of the show. My friend, why don't we start with an open-ended question with what news are you following and the talented staff at Emergent Financial Services?
So a couple of things. This is a great question. You know, missing Judah as always, but we know he's having a great time, I'm sure. One of the things we've been looking at a lot is just keeping track of inflation. And part of the reason we do this, of course, is when we do financial planning for people and individuals, one of the things you look at, of course, is one of the key factors in how long your retirement savings last is the inflation piece, because that's what's eating away at your purchasing power. So we keep an eye on that a lot, noticing in particular it ticked down a little this past month. And what I mean by that is year over year, July was 5.6%, so 5.6% higher, the consumer price index, than 2020. August dropped down to 5.3, so 5.3% higher than August of 2020. So that tends to show a little bit of a slowing pace, because with the key with inflation, you just don't want it to be ever increasing, right? If the price level goes up 5% and then stays there, that's okay for people long term. It means you had a tough year, but long term, as you're thinking about the power of your savings, right, you're okay. It's not being eaten away every single year. What you don't want is that inflation that sort of eats away every year. I call it the Federal Reserve coming in and taking money from under your pillow.
Right, yeah.
And be like, they're like
that's exactly what it is.
Yep, exactly. It's like the reverse tooth fairy. Instead of giving you something, they're like, oh, you had $10, let me take one out. And
I think that's the first Tooth Fairy reference on the network in the history.
It could be. It could well be. You know, unfortunately, it's the bad version of the Tooth Fairy. And that's what you don't want, right? You don't want that happening every single year where you sit there and say, oh yeah, my savings grew at 7% a year over 20 years, but inflation was 3% a year, so I really only made 4%. And so that's what you don't want. So that's what we really are keeping an eye on. And I think the market's looking at it a little bit today as well. Dow is fluctuating. I think a lot of the markets.
It's been a tough start to September.
It has. I don't think the Dow, well, I think in the entire month it has not had back-to-back positives since September began. And it's strange because this is one of those market anomalies, because I don't know if you know this, but September is historically one of the worst months. It's one of the few months that has a negative average return over the history of the stock market. And no one can quite figure out why that is, because it's just one of those anomalies that you look and say, is it people getting a little depressed? Is it people taking some of their profits from the rest of the year? No one can ever quite figure out what it is, because it doesn't have any economic basis. There's no data you can point to and say, yeah, this is why September is a down month. It's just one of those human psychology things. And so we may be seeing a little bit of that happening where people are like, September is going to be a down month. Let me get out of the market. And before you know it, now you've made it a down month, because when so many people try to get out of the market, you push prices down.
So the market today, we're seeing green on the board here on our screen in the I Love Seaville network. I'm seeing the 10-year, which is one of the most searched tickers out there, down a bit. We had a mortgage officer, and Julia Roberts from Fulton Bank, on Real Talk this morning. And she indicated that she doesn't see Fed Chairman Powell tweaking or upticking rates anytime this year. And she even went on record to say, even going into next year, potentially Q1, Q2. I'm always apprehensive to say rates are going to rise. When they do rise, it's not going to be this massive delta or increase. It'll be marginally upticking. But I'm curious your take on this topic.
Oh, my dad would up her one and probably say they're not even going to do it in 2023. Because he and I tend to look at this very similar. And you sit there and say, if you looked at the Federal Reserve, what is their incentive, right, to raise rates? And they've clearly said that inflation, as we are seeing it right now, is not sufficient for them to do that. And I mean, think about it. We're seeing 5 to 6% inflation. And the Federal Reserve, even late last year, was saying we're okay with an average of 4. And if you think about that, what does that mean? An average over what time period? Because if you sit there and say, oh, I'm okay with an average of 4 over 4 years, well, then the Federal Reserve can say, well, last year was 0, maybe negative. This year's 5, the average is 2.5, we're good. And so you could, by using that definition, go out 2-3 years and still never see inflation high enough for the Federal Reserve to say, yes, we really need to raise rates now. And if you look at their other incentives, and granted, according to the founding charter of the Federal Reserve, they're only supposed to be looking at inflation and unemployment, right? But we all know that the Federal Reserve is one of the largest basically holders of United States Treasury debt. And the last thing the Federal Reserve wants to do
is tax themselves.
If you think about it, right, last year, the amount of debt that we increased in order to handle with the pandemic, that the government increased, the Federal Reserve is not going to turn around and say to the Treasury, oh, by the way, your interest on this debt just spiked. Right now, that interest is almost 0, right? They're not going to turn around and say, oh yeah, it's going to be 4 or 5% now, because already interest payments are about 9% of our total debt or deficit in a given year, right, for the United States government. And that's with almost 0% rates. Imagine now rates increasing and suddenly that piece of the pie increases. Now the government's going to be looking and saying, now we have to borrow more just to pay the interest on what we've already borrowed. So you looked at that and you say, there's no way that Powell is not in communication with Janet Yellen over at Treasury, especially since she was Fed chair before Powell, and having a call with her and saying, yeah, I really think we're going to have to raise rates, but as inflation is looking a little dicey, she's going to be, what are you talking about? Don't do it. Because there's just no incentive for them to do that right now, right? The market doesn't want it. The United States Treasury doesn't want it, right? And I think for them to do that, to raise rates now, just doesn't make a lot of sense from their perspective. We may sit here and say inflation is worrying, you have to do something about it, rates are too low, that causes a lot of economists believe that causes inefficiencies. In other words, when it's really easy to borrow, you borrow for things that you might not have borrowed for otherwise, right? If you think about companies, stock market, right? Typically you'd say, if I'm gonna borrow money, I better have a really good project in mind. And we do this all the time as small business owners, right? You're not going to borrow money at 5% if you have a project that for expansion of your business and you say this is only going to net me 2%. Right? You would never borrow at that. But once interest rates go really low, there is that risk that people will say, well, if the rate is 0, let me just borrow, and then I'll figure out what to do with it. And a lot of companies are doing that. So there are concerns about that, but my suspicion is that the Federal Reserve is just not going to go down that road. Not this year, not next year. And if you go to my dad and Xavier at Emergent and say, when do you think? He'll probably say, not the year after, maybe not in my lifetime.
Xavier, the closer, Erpy, I cannot wait to see you Thursday, my friend.
He's looking
seriously
forward to
very
it.
excited to see you. I want to localize the material here and the topic matter on the show. And here's one avenue for localization for the I Love CVille show with Alex Erpy. He's the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Folks, this firm, Emergent Financial Services, get with them if you want to grow your wealth or your retirement. They're just great, honest, hardworking, family-owned firm. America, our country, is short 5 million homes from an inventory standpoint. That's a macro key performance indicator. We're going to localize it here for Charlottesville and Central Virginia. New construction in Charlottesville and Central Virginia is not keeping up with demand. It's just not happening. And as a result, we learned this both in Ken Elzinga's economics class at UVA. The supply is not keeping up with the demand. So prices are skyrocketing. That means if you have home ownership under your belt now, you're getting tremendous value. usually the most key asset in your portfolio is going up, up.
Definitely.
The downside of that is if you're looking to get in the game and buy a home, it's extremely, extremely difficult. So I'm going to start with an open-ended question here: the housing shortage and how you're seeing it impact not only the country, but here, Central Virginia, and the Commonwealth.
That's a great question. That is a great question. The number one thing you tend to look at with housing shortage, right? Because we're at a point where, for the average person, your rent or your mortgage, right, is a very significant part now of your expenses. I think it's ballooned. It's much higher than it used to be. I think it's ballooned to maybe 30% of people's budget. So if you talk about because people often say, well, what do I do to budget? What can I change? If your rent/mortgage is a huge part of your budget and that goes up, there's not really much you can do about that. It's not like you can say, well, let me cut corners here. No, that's a fixed cost. If you're renting, your landlord is determining that. If you have a mortgage, that was determined well in advance when you bought that house or now that you're seeking to buy one. So it puts a lot of pressure when home ownership becomes more expensive on the average person's day-to-day living. And that's what worries you a little. That's why you don't want to see these times of dislocations in the market where you have supply not keeping pace with demand. Prices necessarily have to adjust to that. And that's a good thing. Sometimes we don't like prices to be higher, but prices going higher is what prevents shortages.
Sure.
Right? And you don't want shortages. You don't want people saying, I can't find a home at any price. Right? So prices are adjusting to basically bring the market back into balance right now. But that puts a lot of pressure on people, even from a day-to-day perspective, because that's a huge chunk of your day-to-day living expenses. And that puts pressure on your future savings, puts pressure on the other parts of your budget that now, if your income hasn't risen, and most people's incomes have not risen to match this, right, puts a lot of pressure on the rest of your budget because now you have to bring down expenses somewhere else. Groceries, maybe some lifestyle changes you might have to make.
So it's less money on Main Street. It's less
exactly.
money on Charlottesville's downtown mall. Less money in Pantops. Less money on Route 29. Less money for bodegas, for markets, for groceries, for Reeds, for Bodos, for everything.
For everything, basically.
So let me throw this to you here. If rents and mortgages are taking up so much of a Charlottesvillians and Albemarle Countyans and Central Virginians' spending power, when do we get to the point of cause for concern? When do we say, look, the prices upticking are great for people's retirement and their home values, might make them bullish from a portfolio standpoint, but the flip side of the coin is it's hurting. Is there such a thing as local GDP? It's hurting the economy locally?
Oh, there is. I mean, it's very difficult to put a number on what local GDP is, but you know that has an impact. And of course, the balance, right, is it's always figuring out, are people who feel better about their portfolio spending more, and is that more or less than people who now have increased mortgage/rent, right? So whichever one of those is a more powerful effect is going to drive GDP up or it's going to drive GDP down, basically. Or if you want, you could even localize it more. Instead of using like a GDP number, just use a consumption expenditure number. In terms of what are people consuming and spending in the local Charlottesville Albemarle market, and that that's going to have an impact. And it's tough to say which one is a stronger impact, because we can never know these things for certain. But you don't want too much of an impact on one side, right? You don't want there to be such an increase in prices and in mortgage rent costs that you have a really significant damper on people's ability to go out and spend, their desire to go out and spend. When people are nervous, we save, right? Which I'm not against saving, being in financial services.
Right.
I'm never against saving, right? But the economy, of course, 70% of our economy is based on spending. So you need people to be comfortable to go out there and not be saying, so much of my income is being absorbed by this that I can't do anything else in terms of spending and providing for my family. So it's difficult to say when that becomes the point where, oh my goodness, we need to do something about this. But you can, I think, always be looking around the edge and saying, what are we doing now that's contributing in a negative way to this? Part of this is I think, external, right? There are things beyond our control, like pandemics, that affect this. But part of it is also taking a look at what are the things we have in place here and saying, I mean, I had a conversation with someone recently that they actually moved out of Charlottesville. They were in Charlottesville, owned a home in Charlottesville. So completely
they sold their home.
So they had completely owned it. So you're not talking their mortgage didn't go up, their rent didn't go up. They left because their property taxes went up so much. They had inherited
Gentrification.
Basically, right? They basically could not afford the property tax anymore, so they said, let me sell this and move out there. And that's a shame because you want people who have a home here to feel good about staying, right? And you don't want them to be saying, I have to leave Charlottesville because my income is not sufficient to pay property taxes on a home that I already own, right? So you sit there and say, that's something that you have to think about as a community and say, well, are our property taxes driving people outside of our community, and is that what we want? Because then the person.
So what's your prediction of what's going to happen?
Long term, I mean, it's difficult to say. My suspicion is markets always react, and my suspicion is, my hope and suspicion is that enough suppliers then begin to get in the game, new home building increases, where then price begins to come down again. I think now that some of the supply chain issues that were impacting new home building. I mean, there was a point in May, you and I were talking, where new home building was in fact like stalling because of the prices of the construction materials had risen so much.
Cost of lumber essentially 3x, guys.
Basically, it reached the point. I had a friend who he was beginning to look at. He was doing work on his porch. He was beginning to look at fake wood. Which was normally, you would never do fake wood over real wood because it's so much more expensive. And he was like, the fake wood is less expensive than the real wood. So
talking about like Trex decking?
Like the Trex decking.
Yeah.
And he was like, that's insane. And so I think that was having a really big impact on the ability of suppliers to meet the need, right? If you're a supplier of homes, basically a home builder, right? You typically look at a market and you're going to say, demand exceeds supply. This is a time for me to go in. Prices are high. That's a signal for me to go in. But if you then turn around and say, wait a second, my cost is so high that it overwhelms the price that would normally drive me to supply in this market, I'm going to hold back. That's a real big problem because now the market is not working the way it should. So I think the fact that things are stabilizing takes away that supply chain issue and now enables the market to respond. In other words, suppliers of homes, which is your home builders, right? I use the word suppliers just for a basic supply demand. Suppliers of homes look at the high price, say, this is an opportunity for me. I'm going to go into this market, and that changes the equilibrium, right? More supply, same level of demand, price comes down. So that's what you would want to see happening, and I think there were other dislocations that were preventing that from happening before.
I posted a tongue-in-cheek meme on I Love Seville and on
The
our
fire
Instagram,
hydrant?
the fire hydrant with the mattress next to it, and a price tag of $4,700. It went viral. 90% of the people understood it was a joke. 10% of the people said I was being insensitive to marketplace dynamics and that I was causing the problem of unaffordability in Charlottesville. It is what it is.
There's serious issues if that can cause the problem.
If an Instagram on I Love Seville is driving the local economy and housing prices, we got a serious problem there. What is the temperature? You're as connected as I am in this community. What is the temperature on the street as we head into the final quarter of 2021, which, let's cut to the chase. Q4, for a local business owner, whether it's retail, whether it's restaurants, whether it's shops, I mean, this is where they make their bread and butter.
It's going to have to be good.
Yeah. What's the temperature you're reading?
It's funny. I would say it's not as confident as it was, I think, early June, when you looked around and you're like, you looked at things really picking up. And I think the fact that obviously Delta has thrown a monkey wrench into the whole thing, the whole world is dealing with that. And I think it seems to me that expectations have been tempered. I wouldn't say they have gone negative in a sense. I mean, no one is looking at this wave and saying this is last year all over again. Because last year I would add to that uncertainty. Now we're beginning to see a little bit more. You're seeing a lot more, at least when I'm talking to medical professionals, a lot more certainty in the sense of
We know what to expect.
We know what to expect, right? We're reaching the point where we're expecting that this is going to be here for a while. In fact, this may just end up being one of those endemic flus that comes and goes every year that we're going to have to deal with, right? It will come in waves. If you think, someone actually made a great point to me. They said, if you think about it, we measure flu deaths on an annual basis, not a cumulative one. Because if we measured it on a cumulative basis, we would freak ourselves out. Because we'd be sitting here saying, and now it is 21 million dead from the flu, and now it is 22 million, right? So
that's a great point right there, guys.
We as a society adjust the way we looked at the flu, have adjusted in order to be able to go out there and say, here's how we live our lives in a way that is safe but is not closed off from the world. And you're beginning to see some epidemiologists saying we're going to reach the point where we need to begin to look at COVID that way. Right?
How often do you get this? When do we return to normalcy? And I hear this all the time. And one of my buddies said, normalcy, because I agree with you, we're going to have to deal with the variation of COVID like we're going to have to deal with the flu. It's going to be a yearly shot for those that want to get it. For those that don't want to get it, it's going to be sicker times than those that got the vaccine.
Yep.
Just like the flu, I 100% agree with you. I think eventually we're going to be like, okay, we look at, and I'm not marginalizing anything here, but if you look at the death counts attributed to COVID, especially those in the middle age and younger demographics, not a lot of deaths happening in that demographic unless there's complicating factors, okay? So from my standpoint as the father of a 3-year-old, once my little guy can get the vaccine, I know my wife feels the same way, and I'm looking now, Pfizer's CEO said the COVID vaccine data for kids under 5 may come in late October, which is positive news. Yeah, they're getting close. From my standpoint, the last hurdle, and I pray to Jesucristo on this, what I'm about to say here. Good. Okay, I'm literally, okay. The last hurdle here is the vaccination of the kids 12 and under, 5 and under. And then perhaps there's a pushback to the new normalcy. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think as human beings, we tend to say there's always going to be a return to normalcy, but each year is never as normal as the previous one, right? Something always changes. But I think what we're longing for is a time when there are no longer required major mitigation efforts, right, that put strain on small business owners and people's ability to go out and live, right? In other words, we're at it, especially last year, if you think about lockdown, what a lockdown does is basically say we are constraining your ability to live in order to prevent you from dying. Right? And I think what we want, when we talk about normalcy, I think what most people want is, can we just no longer have a constraint on my ability to live?
Well said.
In order to protect me from death. And the vaccines are one way to get there, right? And I think probably the way that most people are going to go to get there. And I think, like you said, I think it's going to be one of those annual boosters, where a flu shot where people say, you know what, how much do I want to go and have the guy stitch something in my arm versus just take my chances and it is what it is. And I mean, hopefully this thing gets less and less deadly over time. That's what typically happens. And so we would, again, I'll cross myself there.
I'm joining you.
That continues to be the case. But I think what we're looking for is to say, can we reach the point where economically we do not have to impose negative effects on people to try to protect them from COVID? Because what we saw last year with the suicides, with just people's
anxiety,
depression, the inability to make a living, some people losing their livelihood completely because their small business shut down. What we saw was basically extremely negative effects in order to try to save us from this, right? And I think what people are saying, can we get to the point where we don't do that anymore? Where we don't need to do that, we don't feel the need to do that, right? And then we can try to manage this in other ways that don't put people on a negative path for the rest of their life because we were trying to mitigate a virus, right? And I think that's what people, I think, are looking for. And I think we're getting there, even in the midst of Delta, because if you notice, the one thing that's different about this wave, no one's talking lockdown to the degree we were last year. I think people have realized you can't do that again.
Well, I mean, the terrible thing about the lockdown, and we'll localize it here to Charlottesville, guys, when we were in lockdown last year, what was open? Lowe's, Walmart, Target, the big box stores.
Yep.
What was closed? Our neighbors and our families' businesses. So we prioritize Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies over the foundation of Charlottesville, the restaurants, the retail, the music, the weddings, the wineries, and the breweries. And some, as a result, have shut down permanently.
Some are not coming back.
Some are not coming back. Are you, and I have a feeling I know where you're going to go here, are you positive and bullish for the final 3 months of the year in Charlottesville and Central Virginia?
So I am bullish in the sense that I think there will be growth. I'm a little less positive than I was before, just because I think there seems to be a little bit of a pullback in people's willingness to go out. I'm seeing it even out there a little bit, that things aren't quite as full as they were before, just from what I'm seeing.
Okay.
There's a couple, let's put it this way, there was a little month in there where I couldn't go out to eat without getting a reservation.
Yeah, it was jam-packed. And now you're seeing...
And now I'm not quite seeing that.
You're going out on date night with your beautiful girlfriend. You're saying there's
you.
Open tables.
Yeah, there's open tables. And so it's a little bit different, which worries me a little bit. Again, fall's coming. Maybe people are not quite... Things don't quite pop in the fall here as they do in the summer. That's been the case for years. But I am seeing a little bit of a pullback, so I worry that we won't have as great a 2021 as I was hoping for. But I do think it's going to be a positive 2021. I do think we're going to see growth, even in Charlottesville. I think a lot of the great work that was done in terms of helping keep some of the small business owners alive is paying dividends now, because now they're getting to the point where it's like, all right, I can weather a slowdown. I can't weather a lockdown, but I can weather a little bit of a slowdown. And I think it won't be enough to really put too many more people. If we can just get the hiring back to normal, I think that's one of the bigger things that a lot of small businesses are looking at, is saying, oh, I need people to be able to run my operations, and then I will feel much more comfortable.
Alex Erpes, guys, is the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Alex Erpes, the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. What is this is a tough question for you.
Okay, let's go for it.
This is a tough question. We have had a tumultuous time in local Charlottesville government. Mm-hmm. The police chief fired. The mayor announced she's not running again. We all know the Louis Vuitton baggage that comes with Nakia Walker. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a revolving door with positions in City Hall. Your clients locally, and how the turmoil of local government that is Charlottesville, how is that impacting their outlook and what they're doing?
That is a good question.
Are you hearing that?
You do hear it. What's interesting is I hear it more of a this brings me individual, not me personally, but as in people speaking to me, individual angst, worried about my city. I hear it less so in the sense of I'm changing my spending / investment habits as a result of this, which is interesting. I think there tends to be, at least from what I talk about, sort of a confidence in the resilience that, well, this happens, but we'll get through this from an economic perspective, and more of I wish it wasn't this way from a lifestyle perspective. Because I think what this brings, I think we're paying 2 city managers that aren't city managers anymore.
We are.
And plus the one that's currently, which is interim. Don't know if that's going to continue to be the case. I think what tends...
In fact, we're paying 3. We got Richardson, Dr. Richardson's still on the hook, taxpayer dollars. Mm-hmm. John Blair, love you, John Blair, now the city attorney at Stanton. John Blair stepped up and filled the role of interim city manager. I believe he's still getting some dinero from taxpayers. Chip Boyles, obviously, is getting like $300K from taxpayers. So 3... Mike Murphy, I think, is finally off the books, the city manager before Dr. Richardson. So 3.
Wow. It's just, and you know what it is? I think when these things happen and there's turmoil, it's uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the biggest drivers of negative economic performance, right? Because when people are uncertain, we hold back. Right? We say, am I going to do this? Am I going to make this investment if I don't know what's going on? If I don't know that the environment next year is going to look like this year? If I don't know what the tax environment's going to look like? I don't know what the policing environment is going to look like, right? I don't know what City Hall, in terms of licensing, regulations, what will come out of it, I don't know what that's going to look like. And so you sit there, and I think what that causes is people to hold back. And holding back is not good economically.
No, holding
right?
back is not good.
Economic growth, especially long-term, is generated by businesses looking forward and saying, I'm going to do things this year that will help me grow next year. Economic growth is held back when businesses are say, I'm not going to do anything this year for next year because I don't know what's going on next year. And anything that contributes to that kind of uncertainty at a local, state, or federal level, but I think especially on a local level, because that's where small business is done, right? Anything that contributes to that uncertainty, I think, is not a good sign. So maybe, again, from an individual investment standpoint, the people I'm talking to, clients, they're not coming to me and saying, I want to stop spending or doing this because of what's going on. But you can see when the conversation, if it ever goes that way, there's just a kind of angst, like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. And to the extent that we know that translates to small business decisions and business decisions where you say, maybe I won't make this investment because let me wait. And it's not that I'll never make it. It's not that you sit there and say, I'd rather my business shrink because I don't like who's in City Hall, right? It's more of, let me wait to see what happens before I make the decision. And that just pushes off potential growth in the community.
We got questions coming in, guys. This is from Mike Robbins I'm going to get to. We got a question from the closer.
He's watching.
He's ready to stump you, my friend, here. But first we'll get to Mike Robbins. If you want to ask Alex Erpy, CEO of Merchant Financial Services, a question, put it in the feed, any of the social media platforms, and I will relay it to him. Mike Robbins says, here's the next question you should have asked your guest, Jerry. Would you advise your clients to open a business or launch one within city limits?
Oh, that is a very good
Good question, Mike.
I think it probably.
And you got to be real here.
I got to be real here.
Okay.
I think it depends what type of business you're going to be running, and I would urge you to do your research first. And here's what I mean by that: there are many resources available in terms of loans, grants, startup funds that are available that I have seen because I work with a lot of nonprofits that are available to businesses in city limits. The moment you are in Albemarle County, it's gone. So you may sit there and say, as I know businesses that have sat there and said, I can save on the taxes and the regulation by being in Albemarle versus Charlottesville. I can get away from some of the things the uncertainty, right? But they will then come back to me, people will come back to me on a nonprofit side and say, how come I can't get this city business grant that's out there? And I'm like, you're not in city limits. You stuck yourself right. And it's the worst when they're basically a Charlottesville business, but their business is
right over the line.
Right on the line.
Yeah.
And you're not in city limits. Can't get this grant. Can't get this loan at this rate. I would encourage people, you got to do the math. In other words, take a look at what the difference is. You can download, so you can get from both Albemarle County and from the city of Charlottesville on their websites the business personal property tax. That's your basic business license. You can think of it as your basic regulatory cost of doing business in Charlottesville versus Albemarle. I would encourage people to download them both. Figure out, there's codes for what your type of business would be, because there's different taxes based on what your business is, basically. Take a look at that. Do a little pro forma. What I mean by that is say, what happens if I make this much money next year in terms of tax regulation-wise? And be confident, so don't sell yourself short. Don't try to minimize it by saying, well, let me assume I'm only going to make 20 grand in profit so that my taxes are lower. No. Try to be realistic. If you're going to push next year and say, I'm going to try to make 50, try to make 100, put that in there and see what your personal property, your business property taxes would be, right? Figure that out, then do your research on the city and Albemarle County Office of Economic Development side, because both offices of economic development have some grants and funding that is out there for small businesses, especially if you're getting started, right? The difference is there are times when Charlottesville is a little more generous, particularly if you're a socially disadvantaged. So if you're a minority business owner, women-owned business owner, I think also in some cases veteran-owned business owner, Charlottesville sometimes can be a little more generous. So take that into account, because you don't want to just...
Free money.
you don't want to. I always tell people you don't want to hone in on something and be like sort of myopic and blind to other things. So don't hone in on the taxes and say, oh, I can't be in Charlottesville city limits. Taxes are too high. I got to get to Albemarle County, only to then come back a year later and say, oh, I missed out on a $5,000 grant because I'm located in Albemarle County and the grant was for City of Charlottesville businesses, right? So do the whole research, take a look at the whole picture, because the first couple years, you may be better off opening a business in City of Charlottesville, taking advantage of that, right? And then nothing says you can't move.
Toby's Pawn
2 years
Shop
later.
did just that, guys. Toby's Pawn Shop went from the city of Charlottesville. Toby got tired of the politics in the city of Charlottesville and then took his business literally right over the city-county line on Pantops by Freebridge. So he did exactly what Alex is talking about. Mike asks a follow-up question. Is there a jurisdiction that you think is more pro-business than the others, and which are they?
Ooh,
I have some insight on this one.
Yeah, that's interesting. So from my experience, right, it's interesting. On the regulatory side, I've had a little easier time with Albemarle. Strangely enough, though, if you are starting up, I have to say City of Charlottesville, and again, my experience as minority business owner, that there are certain advantages to that, right? Particularly in grants that are out there, is that the City of Charlottesville, at least, again, things may change. Holly Lee was a huge asset.
She is.
At,
She was economic
development,
City
and
of
she's
Charlottesville.
now at UVA.
Right.
She had a lot to do with, I think, what was going on there. So, I mean, she was a great asset there. But I still, I mean, there's still great people there that I'm hoping will continue the great work that she started. But City of Charlottesville is very generous when it comes to grants, loans, opportunities for startup there. So it's a catch-22. My gut used to tell me Albemarle, but there are many ways that just on seeing it on the nonprofit side, there are a lot of funds out there for, particularly if they're a minority business, to do startup in City of Charlottesville city limits.
Xavier Europe, but you don't have to pay city taxes, and giving the chaos, would I want my taxes being wasted? Wow, the closer.
The closer. I mean, he is right on that. I mean, long term, you do have to sit there and say, also as a small business owner, as a community member, where do I want my taxes going? I think that's a great point by him, because sometimes we just think of, I want to pay as little taxes as possible. But the flip side is also, the taxes I do pay, where are they going? And do I want to direct them?
How are they being used?
How are they being used? Do I want to direct them to someone that I think is doing a better job, or at least there's not chaos that I feel like money will sort of seep through the cracks and go nowhere?
Like you're paying 3 city managers at the same time.
Exactly. Because, I mean, you sit there and say, my taxes that I would pay for being in city limits are paying 3 people that are contributing, that are not currently contributing to the city, right? Maybe they were in the past, but they're not currently doing it now. And so you sit there and say, that's money that's flat out wasted. I mean, even if you would sit there and say that money would only be 90% efficient elsewhere, right now it's 0% efficient because it's going to places that are contributing nothing. That's a great point.
Nicholas
Good props.
Erpe, CMO, Social Media Ninja, welcome to the program. Alex Antonio Banderas Erpe, the CEO of Emergent Financial Services here. Your father says positive for Q4 versus 2020 or 2019.
Oh, versus 2020. I'm not sure we're going to be all the way back to 2019 by the end of this year.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I mean, look at what the economy collapsed last year. I don't think we're very close yet to coming 100% of the way back from that. To be honest, I'd be happy if we came 96% of the way back from that, and that's still a 4% recession, which is huge. So I just don't see the end of 2021 catching up to 2019. I think we'll have to wait a little longer for that.
Is it Luceria Morales?
Lucrecia Morales. Thank you for watching Lucrecia. Sombreros.
Love sombreros
Mexican
here.
cuisine and cafe. They are right here on Downtown Mall
York
at the end of York Place.
Watching
on the
program.
Water Street side.
Thank you for joining us. We love sombreros on the show. Here's an intriguing question for you. This is from Jonathan. Jonathan, I love when you watch the show. Thank you, Jonathan. He says, emphasize with your guests the importance of the University of Virginia. So often we love to, and he used a profanity here. I won't use it because we got some family people. So often we do you know what on UVA. You get what I'm saying here. But UVA has kept us afloat where a lot of jurisdictions have not been so lucky.
Oh, and I think that's very much true. I mean, UVA is by far
the city of UVA.
It's the biggest employer. It's the reason why Charlottesville is really the type of community that it is. That's why we have that balance here. I mean, one of the things I love about this city and this area is you have the balance of things that you would only find in a larger city, but the feel of a smaller town. And that's because of University of Virginia. And so I think I think he has a good point. There is a sense, I do notice a little bit of a sense, and I saw this last fall and even this spring when students started coming back, right? This almost sense of we love to pile on the university when we feel things are not going right. They don't care about the community. They're bringing these kids back. What if they would spread disease, things like that. And granted, I agree, there's always safety concerns or there's things like that. But we
those
do
are 25,000 customers.
It says 25,000 customers of an institution whose very existence, right, makes this city have more economic success than it would have otherwise. We are a little bit landlocked, right? And there are other cities in Virginia that are in areas that are similar to ours that don't have the growth and the positive notion that we have because of the fact that we have UVA here, which brings tourists, it brings people, right? And so I think there is a sense that you can hold institutions accountable while also saying, I'm glad you're here, right? And there's a way, I think, to hold UVA accountable and say, hey, here's some things you can do better, right? But still say, I'm glad you're here, rather than sometimes we just only ever pile on the negative and be like, oh, these kids, why are they here? Why are they doing this? They might bring this, they might do that. UVA is not doing right this. And just take a pause every once in a while and say, you know what? It's a good thing that this university is here. What can we do to make this relationship better both ways? And so that's how I tend to feel. I think he's got a little bit of a point there.
Vanessa Parkhill, we love when you watch the show. Thank you, Vanessa, for joining us on the broadcast. So the final 3 months, I mean, guys, we are September 14th here. So we're 15, 16, 17 days away from the start of Q4. I was at Lowe's with my family and doing some errands. The honeydew list over the weekend, we had to go by Lowe's. We had to go by Costco. We picked up some donuts for our little boy who loves the Krispy Kreme.
Krispy Kreme.
He loves the Krispy Kreme.
He's a smart boy.
He's a smart boy. He's a smart boy. And we already were seeing the Christmas stuff out at Costco, which shocked us. It's the commercialization of holidays. Christmas in September at Costco. I mean, literally, when you walk in, there are trees that are lit right there.
It's too early.
It's so early. It's so early. So for those that are watching in these last 3 months and change of the year, UVA in full force, Scott Stadium and football games back in action. I also have seen the open tables at restaurants. I have seen the cases and the hospitalizations surge because of Delta. Of course, the media loves to cling and amplify this to drive viewership and ratings.
Mm-hmm. That news sells.
News sells. If it bleeds, it leads. It's a business. Here's the question I have for you. These last 3 months, what are you going to be watching? These last 3 months, how do we know as we head into January and February when a lot of our local merchants potentially accruing some credit card debt, have not paid off inventory, their lines of credit are starting to build up? How do we know that it's going to be strong? How do we know that it's going to be potentially lukewarm? And how do you characterize the local economy?
To be honest, the simplest thing I could say that I'm kind of going to be looking for myself is I don't want to see any parking spaces at Barrett's Mall.
Oh, there you go.
And what I mean by that is, I remember 2019 Christmas time, that mall was packed.
Yep.
And that tells me people are buying goods locally. If people are not out buying goods locally, if there are a lot of parking spaces, I'm not seeing places packed, that means people are buying their gifts at home and having it delivered to their door, which means probably Amazon, probably other large retailers, not local. I want to see Barrett's Mall so packed that I am annoyed that I cannot find a parking space. And I want to see streams of people. I would remember when, like, you're not supposed to park at Barrett's Mall to go to UVA football game or UVA basketball games. You would see the streams of people on Emmett Street walking
past
up.
Taco Bell.
Past the Taco Bell. If I see that again, I'm going to feel really good. Because I'm going to be like, you know what? That's people that parked at Barrett's, maybe 8 at Barrett's, right? Maybe 8 downtown, parking, going to the games, doing things. If I see that, I'm going to feel very good going in to that store. Because last year, let's face it, last year, 2020, did not see that, right? Didn't really feel the energy for very understandable reasons, right? And just you didn't see it happening, and so you weren't surprised when some places that you recognized weren't there in January and February anymore. Whereas, that's what I want to see. I want to see so many cars at Barrett's Road that there's no spots left.
John Noel, welcome to the broadcast. I'm going to do a little.
John, that's Christelle Noel's husband. He's a great guy, awesome guy. Thank you for watching, John.
We love you, John Noel, here on the show. I'm going to throw this to you here, rapid fire.
Okay.
If you were opening a business, would you open the business in Barracks Road Shopping Center, Stonefield, or the Downtown Mall, and why?
Ooh. I'd probably do Barrett's.
You'd do Barracks?
Barrett's.
Despite the rents?
Despite the rents,
Okay.
I think it drains a lot of people. Downtown Mall, I feel it kind of dies.
You
between
in the colder
fall
months?
and spring.
Okay.
So, I mean, if I had the kind of a business like an ice cream shop, Downtown Mall. Nobody's buying ice cream in December anyway. I could close up shop for half the year and just make all my money in the summer months. If I was a business that I needed to do some people to shop at me in like holiday season, Barrett's first, then Stonefield. Probably not as much downtown because it's just I don't really see many people downtown. It hasn't yet gotten to that critical mass of like, yeah, I'm going to go downtown even though it's dark in the winter because I know there's going to be tons of other people there.
Variation of that question. If you're opening a business, UVA Corner, West Main, which is called Midtown, or the Downtown Mall?
Ooh, okay, to be honest, I don't know enough about UVA Corner rent
Okay.
to know.
Synonymous, probably a scotch higher than the Downtown Mall.
Okay. To the corner, then partially depends on the business. If I was like, this is potentially UVA students buying.
Yeah.
Corner all the way. You can do so if you are a smart retailer who knows how to get connected to the UVA student clientele. If you're like a Fernando DeRay, House of Cuts,
Yeah.
guy, you're a smart guy. You may be extremely successful.
So you would say
on the
corner.
Yeah.
You would say UVA Corner. Summer, no customers potentially. Only locals.
But I mean,
Not a ton of parking.
I think they make it up in the rest of the year. It's an endless stream of students that you can't even drive because they're crossing the street.
That's true. That's very, very true. 2 UVA guys here. What would you like to see improve from a city of Charlottesville standpoint?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I think it comes down to you got to show us, at least give the appearance that there is people know what they're doing at the city, right? The appearance of stability, and it doesn't mean things have to be great all the time, right? It doesn't mean every policy I have to agree with, but I want to at least look at the city and say, all right, I know what's going on. I can see that city council communicates and gets along with each other. I can see that the bureaucracy of the city is functioning normally so that at least I know that the policies that will be put in place will be implemented efficiently. I may not agree with every policy, because this happens in a local democracy. Some you're like, okay, I think that's a good idea, I think that's not a great idea, but at least implement the idea efficiently. I think that would be the number one, and number two, can we just make it simpler to do business? In other words, you're very generous with startup for minority businesses. If we could be more generous for all types of businesses, I think that helps as well. I mean, I work with so many Latino business owners. I'm happy to see that, right? I'm happy to see effort being put into that to really cultivate that. want to make sure that we're not excluding anyone from those possibilities, but then just give me a little bit of simplicity so that when someone approaches the idea of I want to start my own business, there's not that kind of daunting feeling, which when I've spoken to people and just myself even sometimes have had of, oh, I gotta do this. Who do I get in touch with for this? I have to call this area. I have to do zoning from here. I have to do this. It's such an overwhelming feeling that I can imagine, particularly if I didn't have the background of business that I have, and I was like a Latino immigrant here, wanted to start my own restaurant, I'd be like, where do I even start? What do I do? Who do I talk to? Where do I begin? If we could just get it really streamlined, so that I would love a one-stop shop. If there was like a place where you could say, in other words, if I walk into the Office of Economic Development doors, there I can literally fill out everything I need to start a business.
That sounds like a business waiting to happen in itself. If you had a full-service, one-stop shop where a startup or an aspiring entrepreneur, and I guess in some ways this is the Community Investment Collaborative, where you could go to a storefront or a place of business, walk in, talk to a man or a woman in person, maybe virtual. We both like in person much better. And say, I want to launch this idea. Help me with the paperwork.
Oh, CIC is definitely that place. It's a shame that because obviously part of the issue is not everyone is going to hear about CIC quick enough. And it would be nice if, and also just from an efficiency of CIC, I mean, it would be nice if CIC and the great staff there didn't have to be like, okay, I got to call zoning for this one, I have to call this guy for this one, I have to get this. That if the city made it simpler, you wouldn't have sort of that sort of leakage cost, right? Where if someone walked into CIC could be like, yeah, let's do this. Let's just walk over there now, get this thing completely done in a couple hours. And we'll get you up and rolling and the confidence to be able to go out there. Because granted, you're right? There's always, anytime there's an inefficiency, right? There's always a market opportunity for someone, right?
Right.
But it would be nice if we didn't have the inefficiency in the first place.
Right.
Because that would then, that money would then be able to be distributed amongst all the business owners that are currently paying that opportunity cost.
What do you think of this question from Frankie Kirby? You don't have to answer this if you don't want to.
Okay.
Frankie Kirby says, fun show today with Alex. Ask your guest who he's going to vote for in the city council election. I will stipulate this. The gentleman lives in the county.
I live in the county.
So he does not vote in the city.
So I don't vote.
So this, in some ways, you can answer a little bit easier because you're not voting in the
yeah,
city.
Basically,
you don't have to answer this.
I'm not voting in the city.
I wasn't sure if I was going to even ask you this question because who you vote for in a lot of ways is personal. That being said, he does know two of the candidates fairly well.
Yeah, and I'm to be honest, I'm feeling kind of positive, just in this general feel with the way it's going.
Positive since last week's announcement of one of the candidates dropping out?
Maybe a little more positive in that sense. And also just, I think that takes away a little bit of the uncertainty, right? Because there was so many questions, is the mayor going to continue to run? Is the mayor not going to run? One way or the other, at least now we know on that front, so we can just look at the candidates that are there and say, all right, have Charlottesville vote for the best one. I'm glad that there's been more positivity, it seems, at least in this cycle than in previous cycles. A little camaraderie, and I'm hoping that will lead to a council that maybe communicates a little better with each other.
This gentleman, very slick and
I'm trying to be very diplomatic here. It just, it is when you live in the
sidestepped that one so well. Your father is saying the same thing.
He's saying the same thing. He knows me well enough that just when you live in the county and you don't delve deep in to who am I going to vote for. I don't like to come out too much and be like, yeah, this person doesn't sound, based on 2 sound bites I've heard, they don't sound great and they sound excellent. That wouldn't really be it would be kind of disingenuous towards them. Because I really haven't been studied. I know Juan. Juan, I have to say, from a personal perspective, Juan is a great guy. CIC, he's on the board there. He's on Charlottesville Scholarship Program board. He's on too many boards to count, but those are the 2 that I know him from. And just, he brings a lot of positivity. So I am happy. I'm very happy for him to see him going down this path. And so I at least know with Juan, we're going to get some positivity because he's just such a friendly guy.
I'm going to say this. You live in, is it Whitehall Free Union District?
That's a good question. I know my representative is Diantha McKeel.
Okay.
I forget the name because I always go to Jat Jouet to cast my vote.
I think that's
That might
it.
be the name of the district.
I think
Might be
that's
Jat
it.
Jouet.
I will say this. I think you would make a tremendous candidate.
Oh, thank you.
Like literally a tremendous candidate. I've said this before. I think you should run. It is the Jack Jewett district. I'm looking now. Nat Galloway, Rio, B. Kirtley, Rivanna, Samuel Miller, Liz Palmer, Anna's Whitehall, Scottsville's Donna Price, the seat that I'm running for. I think you would make a tremendous candidate. Why don't we close with this? And the hour flew by.
It's amazing.
What do you want to see from Charlottesville, from Albemarle, and Central Virginia? What are you watching? What are you following?
I mean, the number one thing I would like to see is I like positivity and encouragement of people to pursue their dreams. And I think when local government has a lot of negativity, things that at least appear from the outside to be dysfunction, lack of stability, I think it dampens people's encouragement. And I think the more we can encourage people to go out there and pursue their dream, whether it's starting a small business, whether it's starting a local nonprofit, whether it's finding that dream job, right? Finding that person that you connect with and get, I want to work for this local company. I want to do that. I want to shop at this local company. The more we can encourage people to do this, because we know the spirit's there in Charlottesville. That's the awesome thing about Charlottesville and Albemarle, right? The spirit is 100% there. If we're not like the number one nonprofit per capita in the country, we're probably close, because it certainly seems that way. The generosity is there. The business spirit is there. The Latino community here is just so amazing in how much we start businesses and how much we're growing there. And just the African American community is so resilient here. There's so many great businesses that work together, share ideas, share thoughts. All the pieces are there, right? And I just think in so many ways, it's just recognizing that. It's in some ways that's sort of, I'd say, the dream child of Forward Adelante that Older Morse founded that I work with is, it's not sometimes even a matter of changing things. It's recognizing what strengths and great things you have and saying, let's think about those. Because if we think about those, what you focus on and you think about can spur you then to positive action. So it's just sometimes a matter of saying, let's think about the great strengths that we have here. How do we make them stronger? And granted, you always have to work on your weaknesses and improve those. But if you only ever dwell on your weaknesses, then you totally lose out in your strengths, because you don't cultivate them and you don't say, if you say, I have this weakness, and you never think about your strengths, you never sit and say, well, I can use that strength to solve that weakness. If you're only ever focusing on the negative, and you're only ever worried about dysfunction, this isn't working, I'm depressed about that, there's a lot of anxiety about this, so before you know it, you sort of retreat into your shell as a community and you say, I don't want to start a business because I don't know about this. Or do I want to really talk about this with them because it might end up in a negative conversation? But if we focus on those things that are working really well and those great attributes that we have, which are the people that are here, I think we can go a long way. And I think we think about that and sort of take away the obstacles that are in the way and then just let people thrive. Because if you take away barriers that are in people's way and say, go thrive, they'll go thrive.
This guy's the man, guys. Alex Erpy, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. I find his energy and his perspective contagious. The positive outlook is needed. I try to embody it here on the show as well. He's the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. I encourage anybody watching the program to reach out if you're looking to grow wealth, plan for retirement, get some finances in order. Alex, Xavier, Michael, Nicholas, rock stars.
Appreciate that.
The Wednesday edition of the I Love CVille show. Thank you for joining us, and a gorgeous day to be alive. Of course, we're presented by SCUMA, Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine, American Pest and Interstate Pest and Service Companies, Anderson Seafood, Ting Fiber Internet powers the show. Support the businesses that are supporting the network and making the community better, guys. I guess quickly, before I go, today
Manana on Thursday.
10:15.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Two more, I think, local businesses. Well, one's a nonprofit, but we've got Kate Purnell from Kate Teaches Swim, local swim teacher, woman-owned business here, as well as Andy Pilifant, who's the communications director for Paramount Theater.
Very nice.
Great local institution. So
you guys love the Paramount.
I do love it.
I know. I've noticed with the guest list too.
So we had Chamber Music Festival.
Oh, that's right.
And Andy was going to come on, I think, a couple weeks ago, and then we postponed it till this coming Thursday. So really fun. They have a lot of great the things that I love to go see, about the concerts and the Pops at the Paramount. I really hope Charlottesville Symphony comes back, hopefully sometime soon. They're a great institution here too.
He co-hosts the show with the closer, Xavier Yerpe. It's 10:15 a.m. on Thursdays on this network, guys. Don't miss that. It is just a phenomenal program. Thank you for joining us today, guys. You guys enjoy your afternoon. All right. Excellent work. I'm going to go over here and turn off the mics. I'll let you know when they're off.
Absolutely.
And mics are now off. And we are now off the air. So you're welcome to get up, Alex.
There we go.
Crushed it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Great questions. Love it.
Absolutely crushed it. The in-person, I know it might not be always easy with your schedule.
I can make it work if that works for you to do the in-person.
I would love to do it. Now, what we may do when Judah comes back, I may do a segment solo. And then, like I normally do with you, and then bring you on air after.
Okay.
That first segment. But yeah, I would love to do it. We have your login. You could even show up at like 12:50.
Oh, just sort of like sneak in
and
come sit down?
Set. Yeah. Let me know. Obviously, we'll touch base beforehand, but it's way better.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to come in and do it in person, to be honest. It's really so close. It's like